Hello, this is Margaret Ajibada, the STEM Positive Disruptor, and today I have a special guest on my conversation, and that's Guy Huntington. He's the human and entity identity and learning visionary architect, but he will tell us more about that. And today, the reason why we have set us this platform, we want to educate, we want to raise awareness, we want to change perception and demystify what STEM is, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We want to show what's happening within our education system. We want to change, review how we are and what's going on in the world. We want to provide solutions as well. And today I have Guy on today, and he's going to tell us more about why he started this learning vision. Well, he tells more about himself, and let's open the floor to him. Hello, Guy.
Hello, Margaret. So, first of all, thanks for having me.
No problem.
I will begin by telling you about my own journey, and I hope that
Okay.
you and others who are watching can relate to it. So, I'm an old guy, as you can see by my gray hair. And about six decades ago, I was entering grade one. And the teacher called my mom and myself into her classroom after school, and she said, Guy has a problem. My mom said, What is it? And she said, He's spelling his name backwards. She said, He's dyslexic. So I spell my name backwards, Y-U-G, Yug, which is a nickname I get called today. And as a result, my mom said, "What should we do?" And in those days, they didn't have specialized resources, so they said, "You're going to have to hire a private teacher." So my mom and dad, who didn't have much money, they cobbled together resources. They hired a private teacher, and she quickly taught me to scan from left to right instead of from right to left. And I was lucky because I learned quite quickly. But that event sort of seared my soul in a way. And as I went through school, I watched how others learned or didn't learn. So imagine you in the classroom going back in the midst of time when you were in classrooms or your kids or whatever. And imagine all those kids who you watch who were struggling with the existing system. So they'd fall off what I call the learning conveyor belt based on time with the teacher at the front and grades, which I did really well in. And you can picture all these kids, and they would act out. As kids were bad because we'd label them as dummies or stupid or whatever. And maybe, like you viewers there, maybe you were one of them. And so I watched as kids sort of acted out. In my days, they used sex, drugs, rock and roll, theater, and sports to basically prove that they were somebody. And that really seared my soul. And I thought, I want to change that. So as a result, it did affect me my entire life. I did lots of things in university. I was the vice president academic, the University of Alberta Students' Union. In my school district, I chaired the first tech committee of the district in the early 90s, blah, blah, blah. But I realized I hadn't really changed the underlying system based on time. And that was what I wanted to do. And so as a result, I then began to think my way through it. And I'm going to give you a story about Mary Doe, who's the daughter of Jane Doe, and basically use her to illustrate what I was thinking about. So Mary Doe is born, and pushing aside all the legal identity stuff about Mary, which we'll talk about in another podcast, when she's 3 or 4, her mom takes her into a local health clinic, and she gives her consent for them to do a learning assessment on Jane. Now, they're going to use a physical bot to do that. And that bot has all sorts of different sensors on it. And it's basically going to assess Jane. It's going to figure out how she learns, how she doesn't learn, how she works with others, how she doesn't work with others, her aptitudes, etc. And all that data is going to flow into what I call a new thing, a learning data vault, an LDV. And it's a database that Jane and Mary controls through her entire life. And on top of that learning data vault, we have what I call a digital learning twin. So I want to give every learner on the planet a digital learning twin. I want to take all this data and I want to process it. And I want to basically create for Mary or for any other kid on the planet, I want to create an individualized education plan for them, which is totally different than the individualized education plans that schools use today. And it basically would have playtime and blah, blah, blah. It would work on each kid and basically understand them, how they learned and how they didn't learn, and basically tailor experiences for them to help them learn and help them become adults. So then from there, I could see that they would send home with Mary, Jane would take home with Mary a learning assistant bot, which I called Assist Bot. And I could see these little physical bots that would go into each home. And you might be thinking, Guy, what are you smoking? That doesn't exist. It does exist. So back when I was creating this vision 3 or 4 years ago, I was reading about QT Robot. You can Google that, and you can figure out about these learning bots. And now they're getting more and more advanced. So I could see as early days, but I could see over time as the technology developed and price points plummet, this could happen. Then the learning assistant bot would be in in Mary's home. It would help her, it would assess her and continually update the digital learning twin in the learning data vault with data. Now that was then sets the stage for many things. The learning assistant bot and the LDV, the digital learning twin, they might decide that maybe they need to bring in a human learning specialist because Mary is autistic. That's what I want to do. I want to be able to diagnose at an early age when you're 3 or 4, if you're autistic, ADHD, dyslexic like I was, blah, blah, blah. I want to catch it early on so you don't have to go through the entire system and be diagnosed with that, which is terrible. So that they might call in remotely a human learning specialist, which is a rethought teacher. So that human learning specialist might come in to their village or their home physically, or they might just come in via technology using a VR environment, and they might work with Mary. That is fantastical, such that when Mary goes to school, it is an utterly different process than when you or I or anybody else watching this went to school. We're holding our mom or dad's hands and we're led to the school the first day. That's all kind of daunting. I want to have it such that it isn't that way. So that Jane gives her consent for Mary's digital learning twin and her IEP and her learning data vault to be available to the school's learning management system. And that changes everything because now when Mary enters school, they know who she is, really know who she is. And Mary can basically, if she's able to, she can take university level courses while she's in elementary. That's like unheard of. So I want to go back and I want to talk about why I created this architecture. So I have 2 relatives who I won't name, but they're very gifted in very different ways. One of them was reading books, large books at age 4. She's very, very gifted. And the other guy he hated school, utterly hated it. He's very brilliant, but he didn't learn the way that school is taught. And so I want to architect it for them. So I did all that. And then this past spring, I came across a book written by a gal out of Australia called Marie Johnson. And she is a visionary. She ran Microsoft's global government services. And she's also an architect for the government of Australia, like me. And I really could relate to her. And she wrote about something that had happened to her. So one of her grandkids has learning disabilities. And so that took her into the world of disabilities and learning. And she wanted to basically cater to people with disabilities. And so she went to the Australian government. She said, let's create a program where we can create different interfaces for different people who have different ways of communicating to the system, and they can then interact with the government and the learning disability systems. The government agreed. I think it was about $8 or $9 million, not a lot of money. And then Marie formed this team called co-design. And co-design is where they bring in all sorts of people of disabilities and also ethnic abilities, also different languages and racial types and minorities. And they basically create the design of the system for them such that different people can interact with the system in different ways. They can use technology or whatever. And we went through the proof of concepts. They went through design, they went to piloting, and they were ready to rock and roll and ship it out. They were getting an award that night, and the Australian government canned the project because of politics. And Marie was so mad. She went to the Australian Senate and testified, and she wrote a book, which I read this past spring. And that affected me deeply because of my dyslexic in my early days. And I thought, holy schmoly, I have to incorporate this in the architecture. So I redid the entire architecture to leverage co-design. So my vision to you, the viewers, is we have to rethink what we do. The old system, which Sir Ken Robinson talked lots about, is a conveyor belt based on time using a factory type model where the bell rings and you go from subject to subject and you go from grade to grade based on time. That works for some people, but it doesn't work for everybody. And in today's age, it's no longer viable. And that's what I wanted to architect for, such that when going back to Mary in school, when she graduates from school, she can then basically continue on learning. I want to basically design a system such that it works for an old guy like me with my gray hair. And I'm now 67 years old. So I want to basically keep learning. So I want to have this digital learning twin, individualized education plan still working for me when I'm 67 or 87 or whatever. And that is out of the box thinking, such that it will really help businesses when they have to retrain people. Because Mary will give her permission to basically access the digital learning twin, the IEPs, blah, 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 and that they can really rapidly retrain Mary such that she can learn really fast. That is out of the box thinking. I'm nearly done, but I realized as part of this vision, it required a rethink of legal identity. And in another podcast, we'll talk about that because we have all these identities showing up, digital identities, digital learning twins, bots, blah, blah, blah. How do you differentiate friend from foe? You can't.
You can't. Yeah.
End of my spiel.
Well, thank you, Guy. I do love the idea of, being able to create individual learning plan for individual people because not, as you say, there's not one box, one shoe fits all. And I think it's about thinking out of the box. It's about changing people's perception because I think when we think about the education system as a whole in the UK itself, there's a lot of struggles. There's a lot of people with some form of disability, no, the visual disability and the non-visual disabilities. And because of the way the education system runs right now, you're not able to cater for everyone. And you find that the young people that are coming up in the system itself are struggling because they end up reacting in such a way that's so negative that they get banned from the classroom or they put them in a special needs class. And I think what you're saying is that what your vision is how you see things is if you can create an individual learning plan from the beginning, you're able to identify the different needs, the different ways of or helping them to improve so that they can fit into the system and not create or there will not be problems down the line. And you made a good example about these two people that one wanted to learn from a very young age, so she was able to adapt to learning very quickly. And then there was this other person who struggled learning. And then this is a reality today. We have so many different types of people that find it easy to learn and others who struggle and find it really boring. So your idea of creating that world that enables them to learn in a safe environment, but also talk about the co-design is so critical to our change in the learning the education system. But it's also about knowing how to do that. And it's about breaking it down in such a way that when people hear this, they can say, oh, okay, it's not that difficult itself, but of course you know how that's going to work, and if you are the one that will bring it to the table to explain how this is possible to create this world for those coming up in the system right now, but also for older generations, because you talked about wants to learn but not having to struggle to fit in and be confused by it. But technology is also available to enable quite a lot of things to happen as well. So yeah, go on. Sorry.
So I want to talk about teachers because some of my teachers in high school, I became best friends with them for years until they died a long time ago. And teachers make a big difference, right?
Yeah.
But more on the personal level. So I could see how the role of teachers would change over time, not overnight. So I could see Mary Good Teacher. I wrote about Mary Good Teacher, and she's teaching Jane's kids, John and Mary, and they have teaching assistant bots, which I call Bob Bot and Patty Bot. And they could be anywhere on the planet. Mary Good Teacher could be in the same physical classroom as Mary and John, or she could be elsewhere. And I could see how over time this would radically rethink how things go in a school or learning in general. So they could basically come into Mary's home and do this or not. That's like a total rethink of how we view things on processes. It also
Mm.
requires the ability to have legal identities. Like, how are you going to know it's Mary Goodteacher on the other side of the VR environment? Or how are you going to know it's
Exactly.
Todd and Patty Butt? And how are you going to
Mm.
know they got their credentials or they don't?
Mm.
That's all the legal identity stuff, which we'll talk about later, but it's complicated. So it's not like a little tweak and twiddle where you just create a little thing that works in the classroom. It's
Mm.
broader than that. End of my babble.
Indeed. And also, what I would like you to do is to clarify what bot is, BOT, because not everyone will understand what that is. But I want you to, because it's very important that we also make it easy for the audience to understand what you're talking about.
So there are two types of bots in general. There's a physical robot, which I wrote about 8 years ago. And you could Google QT robot and you'll see a little physical bot. And then there's other bots now that do parkour courses and blah, blah, blah. They're very sophisticated.
Mm.
And then we have digital bots. And so a digital bot could be an AI agent. So I wrote about AI agents in kids, which is a paper I really strongly recommend readers dive their way through. And I wrote about how Mary and John bot would have, John would use shopping bots, they'd use bank bots, they'd use whatever kind of bots
Mm.
in their lives. And all
Mm.
these are digital bots who have some type of smart, and they can then do things on our behalf, which
Mm.
is good and it is bad because it brings all sorts of privacy, security. And I'm an architect, so I don't want to babble right now about that. But in later
No.
podcasts, we'll dive down into the details and you'll see the complexity.
Indeed. Well, thank you for the clarity because I think it's so important to make sure the audience the people that listen to this understand what you're trying to say and why it's important as well. So I just want to go back slightly because you said you start the reason why this is so important is because of your journey, but it's also important because of is it Maria and from Australia
Yeah,
and the issue
agree.
that she had where initially the government bought into the idea of having this solution being put forward, and then they decided they didn't want to do it. I know that it's very political. I mean, that's another topic altogether. We don't want to delve into that, but I think in a way, when you think about the journey and why it's so important for us to think out of the box, it's also very important for us to understand the complexity of it. Because again, what we don't want to do or what we don't want to put to the audience is that hold on, it's so complex that it's going to be so difficult to do. It just means that, well, it's just an idea. There's no way we can implement or apply it in our environment. So, what would you say? Because I think it is very important because even though it's quite complex, or it can be quite complex, if we can engage with the idea and how we can be brought to the next level, what would you say to the audience that do not get stuck with the complexity? Or I don't know, I don't want to put that into your mouth. I want you
So,
to
so there's
explain
2
sort of
points
what,
about
yeah, go
it,
on.
is that people often get overwhelmed. They sort of tune out. They think, guys, this is way too complicated.
Yeah.
I'll come back to that in a second. I want to talk about Marie Johnson a little bit more because her husband has had 5 open heart surgeries.
Okay.
And she took all the lessons she learned from her failure and she applied it. And she wanted to basically create with her husband a resource for people around the planet that they could use to basically learn about heart operations and heart conditions. And they
Okay.
created something called Cardiac Coach, where they used co-design. So you can Google Cardiac Coach and read all about it. So that is one way where, in a small little way, people can take some technology and use it and adopt co-design and build all sorts of different interfaces to what she calls bounded knowledge.
Mm.
Um, that's point number one. Um, the second point is I forgot where I was. The second
So
point
the
is
complexity of the
uh,
of why should we bind or what's different? I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah. The second point is that when we design systems for people,
Mm.
we I know what it was. Sorry, I'm back from my Alzheimer's moment. What I was thinking was that when we design systems for people, we don't understand the complexity, and so the complexity can bamboozle a lot of people. And I wrote about how in one paper, I said, why should the government do this? And I said, why should you read this 503-page document? And I described it as akin to a plane, designing an aircraft plane system that flies through the air. And I said, it's really complex. And I said, but we don't understand that. We get on the plane, we go through security, we get on the plane travels through the air, it lands in a different country, and we just assume it's all working. We get ticked off if it's late. That's us, right? Now, underneath that is a whopperly complex system because each plane is made by different manufacturers, has its own identifier. Then it's bought by an airline. It has a unique flight number for that particular flight. It then goes to a stall in the airport. There's all sorts of security procedures. It then, when it takes off, it's by an air traffic control system, which works locally and globally. All of that is akin to what we have to do to rethink learning and legal identity. And people, if you can understand that scenario and then apply it to that, that's what we have to do to change the big picture. It's not like a little tweak and twiddle, which one government can do on their own in isolation from everybody else.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you for that. Do you know, it, there's so much packed into this. But I do want to go back to Marie as well, just talk about co-design and the importance. Why is it so important? Because again, we talk a lot. We know why, but I think sometimes we don't take it seriously enough.
Okay, so
Please.
co-design. So what I could see is how people with disabilities are going to become really important in the world. Why would I say such a thing? Because they have different ways of interacting with information and conversations with people. And some of them, like maybe they're blind, or maybe they have ADHD, or maybe they're ASD, or their race, their jargon is quite different. And I could see how all of these differences will become very valuable to governments and to companies and to enterprises as they do rapid change, because we're going to use technology to create all sorts of different interfaces to people. We might use AI, AR glasses, augmented reality. We might use VR glasses, whatever. And there's going to be all sorts of different ways of interacting as we walk down a street or as we interact with people in a classroom, work environment, whatever. And so co-design then becomes critical in basically being able to design systems that work for a wide variety of different users.
Mm.
And that is what Marie Johnson is leading the pack with her cardiac coach, and which is what I've then built in the architecture for legal identity and for learning architecture. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Yes, it does. And I think in a way, I mean, we can drill down, but we don't want to do it. Again, what we want to do is give a taster. I think if the audience do want more information to come to you and have a deeper conversation on that. But also we're going to have a next podcast as well where we can actually go into more details as well. But we're going to talk about the legal identity and the issues and the things we can do and then move it. Or you can, again, I want you to lead in it by what I do want is for the audience to listen to you. I want them to hear what you're saying because there is a need for change in the education system. There is a need for us to be aware that not one size fits all in the education system. There's a need for us to change how we see things. Even though it may look complex, the opportunity is right now for us to bring those changes, to put those changes into place because we've got the future generations, and there's so many children that go into school and end up with nothing because they're struggling to fit in with the environment because the environment's not conducive to enable or and empowering them to be able to produce the best out of them. So,
Do we have time to talk about kids in poor villages around the world, or do you want to do that in a different podcast?
we want to take 2, 3 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I've had the privilege over my lifetime being able to travel overland through large portions of the planet, and I've been in hundreds of villages that are very, very poor. And so while I was constructing this learning vision, I was thinking about those kids. I was thinking about how they don't have access to electricity, they don't have access to the internet. And there's like in Africa alone, there's about 350 million kids who don't even go to school.
Mm.
I thought, oh my God. So that's what I wanted to architect for. So I wrote in the architecture, I basically architected for that. But there's all sorts of challenges with that. So first of all, I had a specialist come into Learning Vision. So I had Sheena and Rohit, two kids in a learning village, and they're very poor. I had a specialist come in, and first of all, they basically figure out how to bring electricity and internet to the village. and then they bring within the learning assistant bot. Now that bot has to be different than the bots that go in our home because there's unhygienic conditions. And then it's going to basically diagnose Sheena and Rohit and do all the stuff I just talked about with Mary. And then there's going to be a teaching assistant bot and a learning assistant bot that's brought in. Just one. So one's going to help the teacher in the one room classroom. The other one's going to help the kids, but only in a limited time spell. So then I knew about how villages can be really manipulated by evil people, gangs, criminals, organizations, military. And so I could see them coming in and wanting to take away all this technology and use it for themselves. And I wanted to design the architecture such that the tech wouldn't work if somebody did that. And then I could see them coming back madder than hell. And they were going to basically take this tech and they're going to dump it in the outhouse and all this shit and urine. And I wanted to architect it such that the technology would work in that environment, take it out, clean it out, and it still works. That is the reality of around the planet, other than where you and I live, because we live like privileged lives.
Of course,
and I want to basically design it such that it doesn't. Now, do I have like a magical solution for all this? No. And so oftentimes on projects, people will say, they'll say, Guy, why FOS? You're full of shit. How could you write about X when you didn't know about Y when you wrote about X? Duh. And I love it because I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And I want to basically architect it such that that smart people than I could come in and change the architecture.
Of course.
That's the end of my spiel.
Well,
there you go.
Well, thank you very much, Guy. I seriously, I can't wait for the next podcast. We're going to talk more in detail. But I think also, just listening to you right now, it's also about stripping back and saying, how can we take from where this idea, this vision to the next stage? And what are the things we need? What are the costs? Because there's a cost, there's a lot of, and there's also different elements that we need to put into place as well. And I think it's to understand that, because again, what I don't want is for people to listen to what you're saying and just say it's just an idea. But if we can break it down to see how to bring it to that realness and real reality of things, that also means that they will pique their interest and curiosity as to, oh, maybe there's an opportunity here for us to do something great, and to follow on your lead as well. So that's what I want to do. So again, I thank you so much, Guy. I can't wait for the next step on this and what you're going to tell us about what we're doing, what we need to do, and and all that sort of thing. So in the next podcast, which we're going to talk more in detail as to why it's so, not so much why it's important, but the other parts of the next stage, the legal identity. What are the issues? What are the things that we should be taking into account? Not just talking about where things are easy to put into place, but also you talk about the remote areas where they don't have the facilities, the technology, you talk about electricity and everything. How can we make that difference? Because you talked about two elements. There's one about the school aspect, and also when you're indoors, and you talk about the people we have to contact. So you in one of your articles, you talk about the evil is incorporated in. We can talk more about why we should need to be aware of that. I know I'm smiling or laughing, but this is very, very important as well for us to think about. What do we need to do? How can we safeguard? Not just, we don't want to put a system in place that is okay for just a short minute or hot minute, and you find out it then gets invaded by others and they take it to use for their own advantage. What can we do? What are the things that we need to start thinking about? It's about solutions. That's what you're saying. It's about solutions, about changing one's perception, raising awareness, but changing and bringing and making our world more inclusive, and helping those with learning difficulties or the disadvantage of not being the normal so-called type of people that can do whatever they can do, can engage straight away, but they need a different way of adapting or find tools to adapt to accomplish what they are, the potential that's within them itself. So we're going to do that next time. So thank you so much, Guy. I can't wait for the next conversation we're going to have. So again, I do want to tell you guys, because the reason why we set up this platform, we want to educate, we want to provide solutions, we want to change how we see things. The education system right now could be better. We've had conversations about what we want to see see happen. Guys come with an amazing, a very thought-provoking a way of thinking and having a learning vision about enabling having individual learning plans, but having certain tools in place to enable that to happen. But the next stage is going to tell us more on the legal identity aspect of it and much more beside that. So please listen to this podcast, share with your network. If you have any questions, guys, at the end of the line, I'll put some information about how you can make contact with them as well if you want to learn more as well. And if you have any ideas and if you want to collaborate with them again, this is why we have this platform so that this opportunity can arise as well for that to happen. So thank you very much, Guy, again. Can't wait for the next podcast. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye bye.